They've already transferred $40,000 from your savings account." The dusty seal on the 1998 Bordeaux was still intact in my hand when David's lawyer's voice cut through the phone, sharp as a blade. Suddenly, her business trip to Singapore wasn't just a trip. It was a one-way ticket out of my life. The Sunday dinner table had become a stage, and I, the puppet who'd been played for 8 months, had just woken up. But that night, I stopped playing the part of the doting father. You won't believe the role I took on instead. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. The aroma of herb-roasted meat filled the kitchen, a familiar scent of Sunday afternoons. I carefully wiped the last of my mother's porcelain plates, setting it perfectly in its place on the oaken dining table that had seen 3 generations of my family gather. Everything was perfect, from the fresh chrysanthemums I'd cut from the garden to the warm golden candlelight reflecting off the crystal glasses. I did all of this for Elena, my only daughter. Ever since my wife passed, these Sunday dinners had become my lifeline, my connection to the world. And Elena, she was always the center of that world. But lately, a cloud had drifted over my joy. That cloud's name was David. I'd never truly warmed to this second son-in-law of mine. He was too composed, too controlled, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Elena said I was too hard on him, that David was the hard-working, stable man she needed after her first marriage fell apart. Perhaps she was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my daughter had changed since marrying him. She'd become more guarded, and sometimes I'd see a fleeting distance in her eyes, even when she was hugging me. An old father's intuition told me something was wrong with this man who wore expensive suits but had hollow eyes. The doorbell chimed, cutting through my thoughts. "Dad, your girl is here!" Elena's bright voice called from the doorway. I hurried to open it, and she burst into my arms like a small whirlwind. "Dad, your roast smells divine." Her hug was as tight as ever, but I sensed it was a well-rehearsed motion. "Anything for my girl?" I smiled, patting her back, trying to find the familiar sincerity in the gesture. David followed her in, a bottle of wine in his hand. "Good evening, Dad," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was limp, cold and damp, and his eyes quickly darted past my shoulder, avoiding my gaze. Tense. He always looked tense. I told myself it was work pressure, but deep down, I believed he was hiding something. "Come in, you two. Everything's ready," I said, trying to push away the unease. The meal began with a facade of cheerfulness. Elena chattered about her work, about their plans. She played the part of the dutiful daughter, the happy wife, to perfection. She served me food, poured wine for David, and filled every silence with harmless jokes. David just nodded, occasionally sipping his wine, and always made sure he was looking at his plate, not at me. His silence was almost tangible. It weighed on the cheerful atmosphere Elena was trying to create. "Ah," I suddenly remembered, "let me go get the bottle. The one I've been saving for a special occasion." I stood up and headed towards my study, where I kept my best wines. It was just an excuse. I needed a moment away from the invisible suffocation at the dining table. Just as I opened the wine cabinet, the phone in my pocket vibrated. An unknown number. I was about to ignore it, but some urge made me answer. "Hello? Are you Ms. Elena's father?" A man's voice, urgent and serious. "Yes, this is he. Who's calling?" "I'm the lawyer for your son-in-law, David." My heart seized. David's lawyer? Why was he calling me? Is something wrong? "Mr. Peterson, I know this will come as a shock, but please listen to me calmly." The man took a deep breath. "Your son-in-law, David, has authorized me to call you. He wants to ask for your help." Ask for help? I frowned. Can you be more specific? There have been suspicious, systematic withdrawals from your accounts for the past 8 months. Most recently, they transferred $40,000 from your savings account. My throat went dry. What? That David? What has he done? Rage began to boil in my chest. I knew it. It's not what you think, sir, the lawyer said hastily. The real culprit is Elena. She's behind all of it. She used the power of attorney documents you signed to transfer the assets. She has manipulated David and is now setting him up to take the entire fall. She has a plane ticket and is preparing to flee with another man next week. David has proof. Proof? You're slandering my daughter. This is some dirty trick of David's. I nearly shouted into the phone, my voice cracking with disbelief. Sir, please, stay calm. The lawyer's voice was desperate. Please, just hear me out. Elena told you she was investing in Fund X, correct? But the money was actually wired to an account in the Cayman Islands under the name Jean-Pierre Dubois. Just ask her about her sudden business trip to Singapore next week. Singapore. The word hit me like a sledgehammer. Just 5 minutes ago at the dinner table, Elena had cheerfully announced, Dad, I have a sudden business trip to Singapore next week. It's a huge opportunity for my company. Her voice, sweet and deceitful, still echoed in my ears. I was stunned. My breath caught in my throat. Fund X. The Singapore business trip. Jean-Pierre Dubois. The scattered pieces suddenly clicked into place, forming a hideous mosaic of betrayal. My beloved daughter had been planning my ruin. The cozy dinner outside was just a stage, and I was the only audience member who didn't know I was watching a farce. A surge of pain, hot and searing, rose within me, but it was immediately followed by a strange, chilling calm. The initial rage subsided, replaced by a steely resolve. The easy-going, blindly loving father had died in that room. My unconditional love had been used against me. An old father's intuition had told me something was wrong, especially since 8 months ago. That's when Elena had insisted I needed help managing my finances. You're not getting any younger, Dad, she had said with that worried smile I had trusted completely. Let me share this burden with you. The burden, my life's work, the investments I had carefully nurtured. I had given them access, believing it was an act of love. I took a deep, steadying breath, my voice eerily calm when I finally spoke into the phone. I understand. Tell him to wait for my signal. I hung up and set the phone down. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the wine cabinet, a 72-year-old man whose eyes had lost their light. But beneath that exterior, another man was rising. A strategist, a man who had built a fortune from nothing and would not let it be stolen by the very child he adored. The play had to go on. Only now I was the director. I selected the most expensive bottle of wine, wiped the dust from its shoulders, and smiled. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth. It was time to return to the stage. I walked out of the study, the wine bottle in my hand, feeling as if it were filled with lead, not wine. The weight came not from the glass or the liquid within, but from the terrible truth pressing down on my mind. The smile I forced onto my face probably looked strained, but in the dim candlelight I hoped no one would notice. My every movement was deliberate, slow, and calm. I couldn't give anything away, couldn't let the wolf in sheep's clothing know the hunter was now awake. Here we are, I said, my voice naturally deep. A 1998 Bordeaux. I've had this since you were in college, Elena. I placed the bottle on the table, my eyes flicking toward David. He flinched, his body tensing like a cornered animal. Elena, however, smiled, completely oblivious, the smile of a master actress. "Oh, Dad, you're too much," she said, raising her glass to me. I poured the wine, a deep crimson liquid sparkling as it filled the glasses. The atmosphere remained outwardly warm, but to me it had grown cold. Every word, every clink of silverware against porcelain echoed in my head as a lie. David kept stealing quick, frightened glances at Elena as if seeking instruction. She remained the center of the universe, directing every conversation, radiant and full of life, while her puppet sat there, paralyzed with fear, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow. I decided to begin my own play, but with a different script. I needed to give David one last chance. "David," I said, turning my attention to him, "Elena keeps telling me I've been mixing up numbers lately." Getting old, I guess I let out a dry chuckle that sounded false even to my own ears. "Could you explain that high-yield fund to me again?" She said it was a special opportunity, some kind of offshore trust. I can't quite recall the name. She said you're the expert. David's head snapped up, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but his gaze immediately shifted to Elena, waiting. This was her chance, a chance to tell even a sliver of the truth, to show that her conscience wasn't entirely dead. I pressed on, my tone still casual, deliberately absent-minded. "And what about that $40,000 withdrawal last week? I remember signing the authorization, but I didn't think it would be executed so quickly. That was for the initial investment, wasn't it?" I kept my eyes on David, but the question was for Elena as well. I wanted to see what fantasy she would spin next. This time, she didn't give David a chance to speak. "That's right, Dad. We had to act fast or we'd miss the boat. The fund was only open for a short capital-raising period. I had to really convince David," she said, then turned and patronizingly patted her husband's hand. "He's even more cautious than you are, always wanting to review more contracts and whatnot. I had to tell him that opportunity waits for no one." David flinched away from her touch as if he'd been burned. It was the last straw. Elena wasn't just lying, she was casting him as a foolish, hesitant accomplice in his own lie. David's face hardened. All hope had vanished, replaced by a hollow, cold resolve. I saw it all. I knew I had my answer. I feigned a frown, a flash of irritation to cover the contempt rising in me. "Let the man speak, will you? This is man talk." I turned to David, increasing the pressure, backing him into a corner. "David, after we finish, come to my study for a chat. You look like you have something on your mind. It was a gamble. I was deliberately creating an opening to isolate him, to see if he would dare to take it. But I had underestimated my daughter's control." Elena shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, shattering the tense atmosphere. "That's enough, Dad." "It's getting late," she said, her tone firm. She pulled David, who was still frozen in his seat, roughly by the arm. "We have to go. David has an important meeting tomorrow." "We can talk some other time. Don't make things difficult for him." She gave me no room to argue. Her excuses were rushed, almost rude, as she quickly hustled David out of the dining room. He followed like a shadow, not daring to look up at me. The front door slammed shut, cutting off all sound and leaving behind a heavy silence. I sat alone at the table, surrounded by the lavish, now cold meal. The smell of the roast still lingered, but now it just made me sick. The 1998 Bordeaux was half finished. My play had failed in its first act. Elena was too vigilant, too controlling. She protected David not out of love, but as a shepherd protects his prize sheep before the slaughter. But it didn't matter. I realized a direct confrontation would be fruitless. I needed a different strategy. I had to divide them, and to do that, I had to target the weakest link. And that link, ironically, was my daughter. Not because she was weak, but because she was arrogant. Her blind confidence that I would always trust her unconditionally, that my love was an unbreakable shield she could exploit forever. That very arrogance would be her undoing. 2 days passed in silence. They were the longest 2 days of my life. With every passing hour, I fought the urge to call, to scream the truth at them. But I held back. Rage is a blunt instrument. What I needed now was a scalpel. I let the tension I had created between them fester. I knew Elena. She wouldn't let it go. My attempt to speak privately with David on Sunday would have planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She would wonder, she would torment herself, and ultimately, her need for control would win out. I just had to wait, like a chess player who has sacrificed a pawn, waiting for his opponent to fall into the trap. And just as I predicted, on Tuesday afternoon, I decided it was time. I chose a moment when she had just left work, when her mind would be tired and her defenses lowered after a long day. "Hello, Dad," her voice came through, a little surprised. I made my voice warm, loving, and laced it with a well-rehearsed touch of concern. "Sweetheart, I'm not calling about anything important. I was just worried about you. You two seemed a bit unnatural on Sunday night. I can't stop thinking about it." "It's nothing, Dad," she replied quickly, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "Just a lot of pressure at work lately." "Is that so?" I drew out the words. "I was just worried there might be trouble between you two. David looks like a ghost these days. He's lost weight, and he has dark circles under his eyes. Have you been fighting?" I skillfully played the part of a father who trusts only his daughter, showing concern while simultaneously sowing suspicion against David. "Of course not, Dad." "He's fine. It's just the end of the quarter, lots of books to close." "You know how meticulous David is," Elena said, a little defensively. "Or, is there a problem with his business that's affecting my money?" I launched my probe. "You know, I trust you most of all. I put you in charge of overseeing all the paperwork. Just tell me so I can have some peace of mind." There was a short pause on the other end, just long enough for me to know she was choosing her words carefully. "Don't you worry, Dad," Elena finally said, her voice softening, full of false confidence. "Everything is fine. The returns are even better than expected. David's just a little stressed because he wants everything to be perfect for you." I knew I was on the right track. She was covering up, painting a perfect picture. It was time to set the bait. I sighed, the heavy, weary sigh of an old man. "Well, I hope so. I'm just afraid he's hiding something from you." I paused, then spoke as if a random thought had just occurred to me, my tone casual. "Oh, by the way, I was trying to remember. I ran into an old friend the other day, Frank, Frank from airport security. He said he saw you in the international terminal with a man, looked unfamiliar, tall, blonde hair. Must be a business partner, right, Elena? He looked French or Belgian, maybe." I wasn't direct. I offered a vague detail, but one that was specific enough to startle her. I was betting on the name Jean-Pierre Dubois, which the lawyer had given me, and my description was the perfect trap. The silence this time was longer. It was thick, stretched taut like a piano wire. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to piece things together, trying to find a plausible explanation for an impossible coincidence. "Oh, oh yes," Elena's voice finally came, but it had lost its natural ease. There was a slight, undeniable stammer. "He's a partner from my company, Dad. A consultant from France. We were at the airport seeing off a delegation. You know how your friends exaggerate." She tried to laugh, but the sound was forced and dry. "Is that so? Well, that's good then. I said, my voice full of relief, completing my performance. "I just worry my girl is working too hard." "You get some rest now. Come over for dinner this weekend." "I will, Dad." "Bye." I hung up the phone, a cold smile on my lips. I had done it. She had taken the bait. The stammer, the forced explanation. They betrayed everything. I could feel the panic seeping into her voice over the phone. I knew one thing for certain. The first person Elena would confront after this call would be David. She wouldn't believe it was a coincidence. She would assume that David, in a moment of weakness, had revealed something to me. The seed of doubt I had planted on Sunday night had now sprouted. The rift between them would begin to widen, like a crack spreading across a fortress wall. Her arrogance, her belief that she could control everything, was her fatal flaw. She thought my love was a permanent guarantee, but she never realized she herself had turned that love into a weapon against her. And I would be there, waiting patiently, not to deliver the final blow, but to watch that fortress crumble from within under the weight of its own lies and suspicion. Friday, 10 in the morning. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the office of Henderson, the lawyer who had been by my side for over 30 years. His office always exuded an air of solemn dignity, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the smell of old leather and polished wood. But today, the air felt heavier than usual. I was 10 minutes early, my heart strangely calm. My plan had worked. David's frantic call to me the night before had confirmed it. He had begged for a meeting, saying he had something important to tell me, and I had arranged this appointment immediately. Henderson met me at the door, his grave nod a silent greeting. He said nothing, but his eyes told me he understood the basic situation. As he led me into the conference room, I had to stop. Sitting at the long wooden table was not only David, but also another man in a suit whose face I didn't recognize. David looked haggard, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from fear and lack of sleep. He was hunched in his chair, his expensive shirt wrinkled. He didn't look like a smug con man, but like a hunted animal, exhausted and desperate. "Mr. Peterson," the stranger said, standing and extending a hand. His voice was steady and calculated. "I'm Cole, David's attorney." I shook his hand perfunctorily, my gaze fixed on David. "So this is the meeting you wanted, David?" David couldn't meet my eyes. He just nodded, a choked sound escaping his throat. "We had a long talk yesterday, sir," Cole spoke up, his tone professional. "My client wishes to be completely transparent with you. He has made a grave mistake, but he is also a victim in this story." I sat down across from David, placing my hands on the table and lacing my fingers together. I didn't care for Cole's legal jargon. I just wanted the truth from the man who had enabled my daughter. "Well then, I'm listening." The air in the room grew thick. David took a shaky breath, his voice trembling and broken. "Sir, Dad," he began, correcting himself immediately. "Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry. I know an apology means nothing now, but I have to say it." He recounted how masterfully Elena had manipulated him, planting poisonous ideas in his head bit by bit. She had used sweet words and crocodile tears, painting a picture of me becoming senile, making poor financial decisions. "She started with small things," David said bitterly. "She would hide your car keys, then find them for you after you'd searched everywhere. She'd ask you about conversations that never happened. Gradually, she not only convinced me, but she made you start to doubt yourself." David recounted, "She said we were helping you, that we were protecting the family assets from your own forgetfulness. She had turned theft into an act of profound care, and David, weak and greedy, had chosen to believe the lie because it served his ambition. Everything came crashing down last week, right after that fateful Sunday dinner. My phone call had sent Elena into a panic. "She came home like a wounded animal," David said, his eyes wide with the remembered terror. "She started interrogating me, tearing through my things. She accused me of spilling everything. I denied it, but she wouldn't believe me. That night, for the first time, I saw her true face. Not the dutiful daughter, but a cold, calculating monster." That suspicion had caused Elena to make a fatal mistake. She became careless. David, while searching for a document in Elena's study, stumbled upon a hidden folder at the bottom of a drawer. Inside weren't reports from the investment fund they'd told me about, but statements for a bank account in the Cayman Islands, an account in the name of Jean-Pierre Dubois, with a balance of nearly $500,000. "And then I found this," David said, his hand trembling as he pushed a stack of papers across the table. It wasn't just a printed confirmation for a one-way flight to Singapore, connecting to Geneva, Switzerland. There were also printed emails, intimate exchanges between Elena and her lover, planning their new life, mocking the senile old man and the foolish husband they were about to leave behind. "She was planning to run," David said, his voice choked with desperation. "She was going to leave with him. And I would be the one left here to take the fall. Every wire transfer has my signature. Every digital footprint leads to my computer. She was setting me up from the very beginning." I stared at the papers, reading the words my daughter had written. The heat of my anger was gone, replaced by a solid block of ice in my chest. I looked up at David. I felt no pity for him, but I saw a tool, a perfect tool to destroy my daughter's plan from the inside. David was no innocent victim. He was a co-conspirator who had woken up only when he realized he was about to be sacrificed. The truth was out, and it was more monstrous than I could have imagined. My daughter had not only deceived me, but she was also ready to sacrifice her own husband without a second thought. I looked at my lawyer, Henderson. He gave a slight, firm nod. Everything was clear. "All right, David," I said, my voice as cold as ice, cutting through the heavy silence. "You wanted help. You wanted a deal. Then tell me, what are you prepared to do to save yourself?" David drove home, but the familiar streets felt alien, blurred through a fog of betrayal and fear. My ice-cold words from the lawyer's office echoed in his ears. "You wanted help. You wanted a deal. Then tell me, what are you prepared to do to save yourself?" And David, without a moment's hesitation, had agreed to everything. He had chosen a side, not for justice, but for survival. In his hand was an envelope containing photos taken just last night by a private investigator Henderson had hired. They were his weapon, his ticket out of the trap his own wife had set. He pushed the door open to their house. The luxurious home he had once been so proud of now felt as suffocating as a prison. Elena was on the sofa, legs crossed, casually scrolling on her tablet. She looked up, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Where have you been all day?" she asked, her tone like a master questioning a servant. "Trouble at the office?" David didn't answer. He walked directly in front of her and, without a word, threw the envelope onto the glass coffee table. The photos spilled out, face up. Pictures of Elena, hand in hand, embracing and kissing a tall blonde man in an airport lounge. Elena froze. The smile on her face hardened, but only for a second. The experience of a professional liar helped her regain her composure almost instantly. She picked up a photo, squinted at it, and then burst out laughing, a sharp, scornful laugh. "Oh, David," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "have you really stooped this low? Hiring a detective to follow your own wife? You're pathetic." "Who is he, Elena?" David growled, a true rage, fed by humiliation, finally erupting. "That's none of your business," Elena shot back, tossing the photo on the table. "He's a business partner. And whoever he is, you have no right to question me. You should take a look at yourself. A failure, leeching off his wife and his father-in-law." "Leeching off you? Or are you using me as a tool? A shield?" David screamed, his voice echoing through the room. "You think I don't know anything? How stupid do you think I am? What could you possibly know?" Elena sprang to her feet, facing him, her eyes flashing. "You're just a jealous little clown. You can't stand to see me succeed, can you? You can't stand that Dad trusts me more than you." "Trusts you?" David laughed bitterly. "He trusted you with his money. And what did you do with it?" "Where did you send it, Elena? To Switzerland?" The name Switzerland made Elena falter. A flash of panic crossed her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She lunged at David, her hands clawing, screaming, "How dare you slander me? You liar! What did you tell him? What lies have you been feeding my father?" The argument escalated. Shouts, the sound of furniture being knocked over. This was the moment. As planned, David backed away, pointing a finger at Elena, his voice defiant. "Don't you dare deny it. You think he'll believe you? I'm calling him right now. Let him see the real face of his precious daughter." He pulled out his phone and dialed my number, a carefully calculated move. To Elena, it was a challenge she was certain she would win. She still believed I was her final ally, her trump card. She lunged for the phone, but it was too late. "Dad, you have to come right now. David, he's gone crazy." She sobbed into the phone, beginning her performance. 20 minutes later, I arrived. I walked into the house, playing the part of a shocked and heartbroken father. The scene before me was chaos. A shattered vase lay on the floor in a pool of water. David stood in a corner, breathing heavily, his shirt torn. Elena, the moment she saw me, ran to me and burst into tears. "Dad," she sobbed, clinging to my arm, "look what he's done. He's accusing me of having an affair, saying I stole your money. He's insane. It must be the pressure from work. He's jealous of me. You have to believe me. You have to throw him out." She acted perfectly. The tears, the desperation, the pain of a wronged wife and daughter. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, waiting for me to take her side, to punish the man who had dared to hurt his precious girl. I let her cry, let her speak all her lies. I patted her on the shoulder, a touch devoid of any warmth. I looked over her shoulder, directly at David, who stood waiting in silence. Then I gently removed my daughter's hand from my arm. "Accusations?" My voice rang out, not loud, but cold and sharp, cutting through Elena's sobs. She looked up, surprised, her lips still trembling. I continued, each word a hammer blow on the coffin of her deceit. "Then what about the bank account in Switzerland, Elena? The one in the name of Jean-Pierre Dubois, with a balance of $482,000? Elena's face went white. Her eyes widened, bewilderment replacing the fabricated tears. She began to shake her head, a mechanical, lifeless gesture. "And what about the one-way ticket to Singapore next Wednesday?" I pressed on, giving her no time to recover. "And the connecting flight from there to Geneva? You were planning such a long business trip without telling me?" "Dad, what are you talking about?" Elena stammered, taking a step back. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. He told you, didn't he? He made it all up. He tricked you." "Made it up?" I pulled a stack of papers from my coat pocket, the very email printouts David had given me. I threw them on the table, right next to the photos. Then what about these emails? The ones where you call me a senile old man and your husband a foolish husband? The ones where you plan your new life after you've bled this one dry? Elena stared at the papers. All color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The perfect mask she had worn for so many years began to crack, shattering piece by piece before my eyes. Her gaze darted from my cold face to David's, which was filled with a mixture of hatred and grim satisfaction. She finally understood. This wasn't a marital dispute, this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a trap, and she had walked right into it. The play was over, and the spotlight had just found the true face of the lead actor. A silence fell over the room, heavier and more suffocating than any scream. My words hung in the air like shards of ice, all of them aimed at Elena. She stared at the papers on the table, the irrefutable proof of her betrayal. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The perfect mask she had worn for so many years didn't just crack. It had shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing a stranger, a greedy monster I didn't recognize. Then, like a marionette with its strings cut, she collapsed. It wasn't a gentle fall, but a complete breakdown. She crumpled to the cold floor amid the broken shards of the vase and began to wail. But these weren't the crocodile tears of an actress. This was the sound of utter despair, the moan of a cornered animal realizing every escape route has been sealed. "Dad, no, it's not like that," she sobbed, crawling towards me, clutching at my pant leg. "Dad, please, let me explain. I was tricked. That man, Jean-Pierre, he tricked me. He manipulated me." The last pathetic lies. I looked down at the top of my daughter's head, but the fatherly love inside me was dead. In its place was only a cold emptiness. I glanced over at David. He stood silently in the corner, his face a strange mixture of relief and shame. He had saved himself, but at the cost of his last shred of dignity. I gently pulled my leg free from Elena's grasp, a final, ruthless gesture. I walked past her, without a backward glance, towards David. "You have two options," I said, my voice flat. "One, you go down with her. Or two," I continued, "you cooperate with my lawyers to recover all the assets. I will ensure you receive leniency. But after that, you will disappear from my life." David nodded furiously. The choice was obvious. Then I turned back to Elena. I squatted down, looking directly into her swollen red eyes. "What kills me is that you saw my love as a weakness to be exploited," I whispered. "You looked at the father who loved you more than life itself and saw only a senile old man who was easy to manipulate. You didn't just destroy your future, you destroyed our past." "Dad, I'm sorry," she whimpered. "No," I cut her off, my voice like ice. "It's too late. You're not sorry for what you did. You're only sorry you got caught. And you," I stood up, looking down at her one last time, "will face the consequences you have created for yourself." The days that followed were a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. David, true to his word, became a trove of information. He, along with his lawyer, sat for a 6-hour session with Henderson and me. He turned over everything: hard drives with transaction files, passwords to offshore accounts, and audio recordings of phone calls he had secretly made when his suspicions about Elena began. Piece by piece, the evidence was assembled into an irrefutable case of organized fraud and elder financial abuse. Immediately after that meeting, Henderson officially filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. I wasn't there. I didn't want to see my name and my daughter's name on the same legal document, one as plaintiff, the other as defendant. But I knew it was done. The wheels of justice had begun to turn. In parallel with the criminal case, another drama played out swiftly: the divorce of Elena and David. With clear evidence of adultery and fraud, David held all the cards. The proceedings were quick and brutal. There was no division of assets, as most of their shared property was my stolen money. David walked away with nothing but his freedom and a deal for immunity from prosecution. He had sold out his wife to save himself. Elena was now completely, utterly alone. 6 months later, the trial began. I walked into the courtroom, a cold space with dark oak walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. It was a stark contrast to the feigned warmth of my dining room, where the tragedy had begun. I sat in the front row, next to Henderson. I was the first witness. As I took the stand, I felt hundreds of eyes on me, but I focused only on the prosecutor. My voice was steady, without a tremor, as I recounted the story of the 8 months of manipulation. I told them how Elena had convinced me I was losing my memory, that I needed to be helped. I presented the power of attorney documents I had signed in blind faith. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply stated the facts, cold and brutal. Elena's lawyer tried to attack me. "Mr. Peterson, isn't it true you were bitter that your daughter had become more successful than you?" he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. "I was proud of every success my daughter achieved through honesty. What I cannot accept is deceit." The next witness was David. He took the stand, avoiding eye contact with both me and Elena. He was the prosecution's perfect witness. With his financial expertise, he clearly explained every transaction, how the money was meticulously funneled through shell companies to the Swiss account. He presented the emails, the audio clips. His voice was emotionless, like a machine reading a report. He was recounting his own crimes, but in a way that laid all the blame on the woman who was once his wife. Finally, when the prosecutor played the last recording, the one from their fight at the house, where Elena had screamed, "You're just a tool," a fool for me to use, it was all over. Elena's final mask crumbled. She dropped her head to the table, her shoulders shaking. A few weeks later, my life returned to normal, at least on the surface. With the help of the lawyers, I recovered nearly all of my assets. David, as promised, disappeared. My house was quiet again. Everything was clean, in its place. But the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty and heavy. I sat alone in the familiar dining room on a Sunday afternoon. The evening sun streamed through the window, falling on the oak table. But there was no roast on the table. The chair across from me, the one where Elena always sat, was empty. I had won. I had reclaimed my justice, my dignity, and my fortune. But looking at that empty chair, I knew I had lost. I had lost the battle a father should never have to fight. I had lost the most precious thing I had spent my life building and protecting. Not the money, but a family. The house was no longer a home. It was just a terrifyingly quiet space, filled with ruined memories and the pain of a betrayal that could never be undone. The silence that followed was more brutal than any scream. Elena stood frozen, the crumpled papers and scattered photos a grotesque mosaic of her lies. The weight of her father's words was a physical force, pressing down on her, robbing her of breath. The perfect mask she had worn for so many years didn't just crack. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing a stranger, a greedy monster her father didn't recognize. The tears that began to fall were real this time, not for the father she had betrayed, but for the future she had lost. Then, like a marionette with its strings cut, she collapsed. It wasn't a gentle fall, but a complete breakdown. She crumpled to the cold floor amid the broken shards of the vase and began to wail, a sound of utter despair. She looked up at her father, her swollen red eyes filled not with remorse, but with a desperate plea. "Dad, no, it's not like that. Please, let me explain. I was tricked. That man, Jean-Pierre, he tricked me. He manipulated me." It was her final, pathetic lie. Her father looked down at her, but the fatherly love inside him was dead. In its place was only a cold emptiness. He turned away from her, a final, ruthless gesture of rejection. He walked past her without a backward glance towards David. The choice had been made, and the consequences would be swift and brutal. "You have two options," he said, his voice flat. "One, you go down with her, or two, you cooperate with my lawyers to recover all the assets. I will ensure you receive leniency, but after that, you will disappear from my life." David nodded furiously, the choice obvious. He had chosen survival. The days that followed were a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. David became a trove of information, turning over everything: hard drives with transaction files, passwords to offshore accounts, and audio recordings of phone calls he had secretly made when his suspicions about Elena began. Piece by piece, the evidence was assembled into an irrefutable case of organized fraud and elder financial abuse. The wheels of justice had begun to turn. In parallel with the criminal case, another drama played out swiftly: the divorce of Elena and David. With clear evidence of adultery and fraud, David held all the cards. The proceedings were quick and brutal. He walked away with nothing but his freedom and a deal for immunity from prosecution. He had sold out his wife to save himself. Elena was now completely, utterly alone. 6 months later, the trial began. It was a stark contrast to the feigned warmth of his dining room where the tragedy had begun. The old man, sitting in the front row, saw Elena at the defendant's table. She was thin and pale. The confident, arrogant woman was gone, replaced by an empty shell. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment. He saw no remorse in them, only resentment. He took the stand, his voice steady, without a tremor, as he recounted the story of the 8 months of manipulation. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply stated the facts, cold and brutal. His daughter's lawyer tried to attack him, but he stood firm. "I was proud of every success my daughter achieved through honesty," he said. "What I cannot accept is deceit." The final blow came when the prosecutor played the last recording, the one from their fight at the house, where Elena had screamed, "You're just a tool, a fool for me to use." Her final mask crumbled. She dropped her head to the table, her shoulders shaking. The verdict came that afternoon. Elena received a substantial sentence for her crimes. As the bailiffs led her away, she didn't look at him. Their relationship had been permanently severed in that cold courtroom. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. If you've ever been through a similar situation or have any thoughts on this story, please share them in the comments so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.